So, hi guys, welcome to the session on Coffee with Prab. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Mehdi Raghavan, a security architect and cyber risk advisor in one of the MNCs based out in Australia. He also CISSP ISAP, and along with that, he also recently renewed his CCDE. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Addy, because that what I've seen in the LinkedIn. And he's also security architect. And today we are going to discuss about something around the myths. We're going to discuss a lot of myths and bust about security architect, and I will be your first student, Maddie. I want to learn how the security architecture works in the organizations, and I'm sure I will be a good student. And my questions are very to the point. So my questions are on behalf of the viewers who sent me their questionnaires regarding security architects, and will try to make it short. And thank you for taking out the time. I know it's night in Australia and taking out the time for giving back to the community. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Prab, and it's an honor to be here. And I'm also a learner and a lifelong learner. And I think the more I learn, and the more I think I realize I have so much more to learn. So I think so. What I'm kind of going to share today is just my experience. As you say, in security, there's no one way of doing things or is the right way of doing things. It's within the perimeter, or what kind of can be achieved within the construct of resources and requirements of the organization. So my objective is more to share my pearls, what I've learned along the way, in a hard way, and some of them were easy, through projects and initiatives, and also a lot of peers and academics and so forth.
Great.
Yeah.
So what is special today, Maddie? What we're going to discuss today?
Yeah. So I usually like to have something
Yeah, sure.
on paper.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I've got some. I don't want to do a PowerPoint by death, but I got a a kind of sneak peek into some of the use cases typically an architect would observe or probably go through during the live stream of from an organization. Before I get into the details, just a bit of a trailer of it. So so you'll have different phases in the organization. It'll be some organization is just it's a greenfield, like it's a small. It could be a small medium enterprise. They're just on their journey, or it could be an enterprise who's been in the industry for 10 years, 15 years, and they're maturing and they want to go through a transformation. And then how would you go about the architecture side of things around that? How do you uplift it within that side of things? We'll talk about that example. And then once the organization matures, it's profit making, and it'll be peaks and troughs. What's the role of the architect? Does it mean that we have achieved, we have implemented all the controls, we are managing all the risks properly, the board is happy with it, the CISO is running a dream job? Does the architect have anything to do on the plate, or you're just going to chill out? We'll talk through that use case as well. And lastly, we'll talk about a very common use case, particularly around certain domains. Now, when it comes to security architecture, people normally refer them as as an enterprise security architect, or you have a security solution architect. Now, I'm going to talk about security solution architecture as one of the use case. And within security solution architecture, you have different domains. So I'll talk about some of the examples of those domains. So, and as I said, no person is a perfect. So, you could be an identity architect specialty. You could be a security operations center architect specialty, or you could be an application security architect as a specialty. So we'll just talk through some examples, of that, and what's the role, and what's the outcome they can help achieve. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. All right. So yeah, so this is a very simple and common use case. Most of the organizations go through. So And we've been in the digital era for like 25 years. So typically, we said the internet came in around 2000. We are 2025. And most of the organizations have already gone through the foundation phase. If you're talking about a big corporate company or so forth. But there are certain small SMEs. I think most of the small, medium enterprises are very mature and still developing in their cyber journey. And I think the challenge is they got limited resources, they got limited budget, but you want to have the right balance of security within the organization to be able to protect the business. So security's job is to be an enabler, to help protect the business and also help, not increase the cost by putting in all the controls, but also, make it effective in terms of reducing the risk. So the common approach, we've been through is, to take a common industry framework, common industry framework being NIST as an example. And you take a reference architecture, so where these are the controls in place. You analyze what's the entity's industry. So whether it's, for example, if it's a retail industry, what are the key business risks you're going to deal with in that particular industry? If it's small, if you're talking about a retail, a shoe chain as an example, okay, they'll have FPOS systems, they'll have certain customer master data sitting in probably in a Salesforce or a CRM system. So within that construct, what would be the probably threat actors be, acting in that perspective? So most common threat actor in any given scenario in retail chain is credential theft or a data theft. There are two types of threats I'm talking about. So based on that, what sort of controls typically at a minimum you would need to ensure your assets are protected, your data is protected, your credentials. If they're stolen, you're able to detect them and respond to them. And after, in spite of having the protective controls in place. So, and that's an iterative phase you typically go through, over a period of time. And we all went through this phase, probably 15 years back, 20 years back. And I think sometimes, we do go back to the drawing board. When you take the NIST framework, have you got all the controls in place? And then if I say I want to do a NIST maturity assessment year on year, so I've got all the controls, I'm comfortable, I'm doing well, I got a 3.5 out of 5 maturity rating. Now let me go back to the foundational capability maturity model and let me plot out on a red, amber, green, and are there anything missing? So you might still find a few reds there, ambers there, and then you go back to say, okay, is this capability really required, or is in the context of the business, what we do, or is it something we're living with? So and that's, I think that's this is a very common approach of developing, improving, and maintaining your security architecture. I think,
Okay. But sorry to interrupt here, Maddie. There is always a question in the community and all that. See, we have a security program, we have a security strategy, and now we're talking about the architecture or the role of architect. So, what is the difference between the strategy, program, and architecture? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. So strategy, now a strategy is something what the business wants to do in over a period of time. Now that kind of talks about this is the business growth. These are the regional areas we want to expand. This is the channel we want to expand to. And then aligning to that strategy, there will be a technology roadmap associated with it. Now, how is the security strategy going to align to that technology strategy is what should be defined within the strategy. So what it could mean is, okay, we're going to expand onto a new geographical location, which might involve some GDPR requirement, or it might involve some, spinning up cloud platform or syncing up your data into a new region, as an example. Now that, to convert or implement the strategy, you need some program, because this could typically not be implemented as a normal transactional, BAU or, business as usual type of work. So you need a dedicated program or project of work, because you need to have a schedule, you got a resource locked in, You don't want to drain out the individual normal resources. So you want to have dedicated resources with a program schedule. So you need a programmer work to be able to be directive and be pointy in terms of what you want to achieve.
Okay.
And and an architect within that program is an SME pretty much. So let's say that the architect is a conduit between the business and the technology, right? Most of the times, either or in some situations, it could be architect could be a conduit between the program management and the technology function. So if you talk about specifically within the project, because you're going to understand, okay, what's the program scope? Program has got a budget of $2 million.
Okay.
And which needs to be executed over a period of, say, 6 to 12 months, as an example. And there will be certain work packages which need to be executed as a part of that. And those work, and you've got to work through, okay, have we got the minimum control requirements or an MVP we want to achieve, or are we trying to gold plate a solution? You can't gold plate in a 6 to 12 month time frame. So you got to kind of draw the line in terms of what you want to achieve, and then define what's the delivered risk going to be. So typically, there will be an element of control which will not be delivered because you have a resource constraint or a time constraint. And now that will be a risk which will be transitioned to an operational post, as an operational risk post the project delivery. So that's an evolving journey. So typically, any programmer work, you scope the programmer work, align to the strategy, you ensure that the controls are being met, including the compliance requirements, which are the overarching ones, and then ensure that the MVP is met to keep the risk within the tolerance limit with the enterprise. If the enterprise is mature enough to have a risk appetite, we want to ensure that the controls implemented are effective enough to be able to be implemented within the risk appetite. And then you assess, okay, have you achieved the objective, or you still got gaps which you need to be transitioned into an operational risk? So that's how typically an architect's role is going to be. Not to necessarily gold plate, but to achieve the outcome within the available resources.
And when it comes to the requirement of, okay, like, we're talking program and all that. See, when we were talking about building a security strategy and all that and program, we talk about, okay, we have this requirement understanding and all that. But how the architecture built from a scratch? Okay, we can see in front of screen, we take a reference of industry framework, entity landscape and all that. But how we start all these things?
So I think the key starting point would be what type of industry it is. Is it a regulated industry or a non-regulated industry? Now,
Okay.
you'll always have some sort of reference point. Now, if it's a regulated industry, typically in the US, you will have some sort of framework. You have a minimum sort of controls in place. You got to adopt and then use that. But I think people get confused between whether achieving compliance, does it mean that you got everything? So
That's not
there's a
possible.
difference between achieving compliance and and managing risk. They're two different things. You could still be reducing your risk while managing compliance, but you may not necessarily achieve compliance by reducing the risk. So they kind of you got to work them together. So if it is, so a good starting point in any case would be, I think, over a period of time, we've got enough material through open source materials, through frameworks and so forth, through thanks to the international standards. NIST cybersecurity framework being one of the more the most important ones. To refer to as a kind of an anchor point to start looking at what's your foundational security framework going to be. Many organizations refer NIST, but some people have their own. They look at CIS top 20 as an example,
Okay.
or a SANS top 20. In Australia, we got a thing called an Essential 8, which is the top 8 controls. Most of the organizations should be kind of implementing and operating, particularly to ensure that the organizations are protected from ransomware. You got your credential theft, and because typically the controls need to be aligned to what sort of threat actors were active in that country.
Hmm.
So so most of the countries, so like for example, if you look at US, or or you look at some other countries, you've got, based on the geopolitical relations, certain threat actor dynamics, they change over a period of time. So there was an era where there are a lot of state-sponsored threat actors who were attacking the US universities to get the IP from the universities, and that
Hmm.
IP was being used obviously to engineer and design um, you know certain things to either that was on the rise. And then over a period of time, um, based on certain geopolitical relations, um, now customer data or any personal data, now it's the top priority for any kind of threat actor at the moment. So any I would say any system which is a CRM based system, or any payroll system, um, uh, most of and 90 more, I would say, I wouldn't put a percentage, but most of the organizations today, they go a SaaS model. It's a cloud service.
Hmm.
So and you probably see a lot of this credential theft happening. And I think a few weeks back there was also a major credential theft of billions, right? Which is on the paper. So based on that, you've got to have. I think there's some context already being provided through public media and open source in terms of what are the common threats.
Hmm.
So if you look at it, then my security architecture needs to cater for minimum access control. Access control is the top. Okay, I need to have multi-factor authentication. I need to have okay, that's from a protection point of view. Then I need to be able to detect any credential theft which is being put on the dark web. So I need to have some sort of security monitoring in place, and then I need to have some sort of logging monitoring to be able to trace any
Hmm.
unauthorized access attempts being made. So
Hmm.
um, it's not necessary you got to follow. I think if it's a professional organization, corporate organization, they would like to adopt a structured approach using NIST. But if it's small organization, um, if a security architect is hired, they might say, okay, let's look at the threats. What's your risk? We'll do a threat information risk assessment. We'll do some threat modeling based on your assets. And based on the threat modeling of your assets and the information classification of each of your assets, let's define what are your minimum controls you need to put in place.
Hmm.
And you define an architecture around that. So
Okay.
that'd be an example of it.
And that's why in this diagram, if you can see, you mentioned this, all the assets and everything is now part of a business requirement, and that's how we are optimizing a budget for resource. So I think one of the major reason of having an architecture in place, we can reutilize the resources effectively, or we can have a shared resources, and because of the reason we can able to optimize the security budget.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And one is, I think one of the CISO metrics these days they're asking is what's the return on security investment, right?
Hmm.
I think now it's very hard to provide that metric, and most of the time we provide absolute. It's very easy to provide absolute metrics. Okay,
Hmm.
you got a web proxy in place, or you got a intrusion prevention system in place. Okay, these are the threats coming. These are the threats which are you know exterminated, and only we're probably getting only 1% incident or something like that
Okay.
as an absolute measure. But what's important is how is the relative measure of it. You have implemented this particular control, and that has resulted in the reduction of risk, or certain, as an example, if your vulnerabilities are going down over a period of time, that means your DevOps training is doing really well. You know the developers are doing the job properly, and the controls are effective. Um, Similarly, if your phishing is going down, um, because there's no control over threats. So the organization doesn't have any control over threats. What you can do is only minimize the impact of it. You can't minimize the likelihood of it.
Hmm.
And you could minimize the impact of it only by either you uplifting your awareness, or running a campaign, to be able to do that. And then you publish a metric saying, okay, we ran a campaign for 3 months, 6 months. We spent, say, $100,000 on that campaign. And as a result of that, we reduced the impact of the phishing incident from 1 million to, say, $100,000, so something as an example. So that's how you kind of optimize it.
That's great. So this is basically the foundation that we have for building an architecture.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you move along,
yeah.
And as you move along, right? I think in the journey, you've got all the controls in place. CISO is happy and all that. Suddenly now you see that the business revenue is going down. Now, so the CIO says, okay, we need to maybe not the CIO, the COO says, we need to improve our operations. Now we got we have inefficiencies in the way we do our processes. We got redundant processes. We got too many manual processes, we got revenue leakages. So we need to do a transformation in terms of how we do our things. We need to consolidate. We need to improve efficiency, and at the same time reduce risk. Okay. So COO goes and tells the CIO, and the CIO says, okay, I need to do something about it. And CIO will say, okay, how about I come up with a technology strategy and a roadmap to how we support your business growth roadmap to either to what you want to do in the next 12 months or 24 months. So that's the transformational approach. Now this transformational approach, I would say, most of the organizations would have faced in some point of time, because change happens. You've got to change, and change can be either because of your whatever regulatory requirements or your competition. Most likely it's competition, and technology changes, right? And you've got to keep adapting the technology. Now, after internet and mobile, I think AI is the new beast, which is all attacking us. And I think you probably see that the next transformational wave we're going to have in the next, probably say, at least most of the organizations will start that. I think some of them have already started. If not already started, they would be already thinking about it. To do that, how we are going to adapt AI and integrate AI into what we do, or into the fabric of what we do, right? Now, so what happens in a transformational approach? So the objective is, okay, we want to reduce costs and increase, or maybe increase efficiency, and that's always the common factor. But then there's always some trade-offs. You might be introducing some new risks, because you might introduce a new solution. When you introduce a new solution, that means you're increasing the attack surface, because you'll have some integrations. Whenever you have integrations, that means you're sharing more data. So I think from where we are, I think most of the data now is probably sitting outside the organization's perimeter. Everybody's got some form of cloud presence. Either it's infrastructure as a service, being on AWS or Azure, or it will be whatever software as a service for a CRM or a payroll system or any other financial processing system. So data is there everywhere, and there are integration points. Now, so what needs to happen? Okay, is now we need to identify, okay, what sort of new risks are we introducing? Okay, we got capabilities in place. We are a mature organization. We've got our niche. We got a 3.5 rating last year. Okay, we want to maintain that rating. And the CIO has given us a 20 million budget to do a digital transformation and a cloud transformation project. So, and then it goes to the security architect and says, okay, can you help me come up with what should be the controls, or what's the what's the baseline I need to adapt to be able to deliver this? Now, security architect will go and say, okay, you got all these controls in place. Now you're going to put in a new cloud platform, and I'm going to take this solution blueprint. your infrastructure blueprint and application architecture blueprint, your interface blueprint. I'm going to draw up, okay, these are the controls. Okay, these are the new risks you're introducing. So you need to have these controls or apply the existing controls. Basically, I call them as shared service controls because that's already adopted within the organization. You just need to adapt and extend that controls to the project or the platform because they are patterns. I call them as patterns. So, you might be already doing MFA, you will be already doing privilege access management, session monitoring and so forth. So you need to, what's required is, okay, you don't need to invest in new capabilities. Yes, but we just need to extend those capabilities to the pattern of the project you're delivering. And then assess, okay, are we still missing anything? And that's the approach you need to adopt. And there might be exceptions to it, but the general, I would say the benchmark should be, okay, I want to ensure while I deliver these controls, I'm not degrading the existing controls and maintain the risk. I think that will be the best outcome for any organization coming out of the program, is to maintain the risk level, if not reducing it. And that's the main objective. And within that, it depends, because if you look at emerging technologies, particularly with AI, I think there's this they're going to be new risks being introduced because of that. While it might reduce certain other risks, it'll reduce costs, it'll improve the consistency, it'll improve efficiency, but it might introduce certain other risks, particularly around your data movements and storage. But then you got to assess it, okay, whether the risk introduced by AI is more or less than the risk being mitigated.
Okay.
I think that's how you got to look at it. I think so. If the security risk being introduced by AI is lower than the risk AI is trying to mitigate through cost savings and efficiencies, then that's a good that's a good bargain, a good compromise. And they say, okay, I'm a thumbs up, and I approve your program of work. Just let's move on to the next stage of the project. That's how I'll look at it. Not saying, okay, now this is a risk, you can't go with this. So yeah, so it has to be. In a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is, I think you got to be pragmatic. I think the security architect has to put himself or herself in the shoes of sometime of the business risk, business advisor, or also the the sponsor of the program.
And what is a challenge we can see right now with AI? Because in the case of AI, we concern about black box, we concern about their, because see, on one side we're saying architecture is all about visibility. On the other side, when we go for AI or agentic AI and all that, the biggest concern is the models, because right now 90% models are black box, and to building your own in your box, which is called white box and all that, it has a cost. So how we are seeing as a challenge, how the architect seeing as a challenge, and how they're integrating that in the existing one. See, right now your architecture is very secure, does not have a much attack surface. One wrong API, one wrong integration can backfire. I'm sure you agree on this part. So as an architect, how do you see this challenge, or is it an opportunity? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think so. I think we are all learning around, through kind of experiments and failures in this stage. I think, and one of the it will comes through what sort of patterns we have around, particularly around this AI. So as you mentioned, AI, if you consume that as a LLM black box model, which is hosted somewhere else, the best, the minimum you need to have is also what sort of conformity assessment reports
True.
you have from the service provider. So like, from a trust center perspective, like typically, okay, when you go to IT controls, you rely on your, SOC 2 or, ISO 27K. Similarly, you have an AI trust center certificate, which you need to rely on. Similarly, they would have done some sort of audit to ensure what sort of test data they have used into their iterative process of LLM. are the data being stored, within LLMs being used or for further learning, and a lot of other controls around safety, transparency and fairness and so forth. And I think I usually refer. I've done a couple of AI assessments. I usually refer the ISACA's. There's a good audit toolkit from ISACA,
Hmm.
which talks through some of the controls typically, and they've kind of split them up into high risk controls and general controls. And I think as one of the good points you made is, if we took an agentic AI relies on APIs. Now APIs need to have a strong authentication, and those for any authentication you need to manage the keys and what sort of permissions are given to those accounts or credentials. And what's the path through which those credentials are traveling. I think these are the three main things you need to secure. And if you apply the principles, and I think to be a good security architect, if you have a good risk assessor mindset, and
Hmm.
you overlay the solution, and you overlay your solution knowledge and your technology experience. Some
Yeah.
people have got different varied experience. Some people are very good in application security. Some people are very good in infrastructure and cloud.
Hmm.
Um, so, but I think the overall, if you have a good risk assessor mindset, you can apply those principles and kind of pretty much come up with, okay, these are the baseline controls and recommended. Um, and ask. I think it's all about asking the right questions. Now, if you have to ask the right questions, and sometimes people say there's no right question or wrong question, or
Hmm.
there's no dumb question or an intelligent question. It depends, but the question needs to be asked. I
Hmm.
think the yeah. So we need to ask this, and I think there's this uh, off late there's a lot of information overload as well around AI. So I think we need to also be aware of what to look for and be available. So I've been using ISACA, which is a good reference point for anybody who's trying to do risk assessment or do any sort of security architecture work or solutioning with AI in
Hmm.
particular. But yeah, yeah, that's how I would go.
Reason for asking this question is because I have seen a lot of architects has facing these issues now, even after the MCP and all that model context protocol and everything, whatever is the terms are coming in AI. This can be the future nightmare, because no matter what contracts you have, no matter what documentations are there, if you don't have a visibility, you think twice before integrating that. And I'm sure when we talk about the concept of keep it simple or open design, which is a core principle of an architecture, that can somehow get compromised, because on one side you're saying keep it simple, on the other side you don't have any visibility. So that something has to be figured out.
Yes, exactly. I think and I think after the cyber supply chain risk, where I think where we had is um, I would probably say a plethora of breaches, mainly because of third party software being consumed, third party libraries, or data being stored on third party platforms.
Hmm.
Um, this is the next wave of risk which needs to be managed, which is your AI supply chain risk. Because again, AI is a very broad term. If it needs to be contained. So if particularly in organizations who are dealing with sensitive data, they need to have a AI pattern where
Hmm.
they would do harvesting of data of AI through machine learning models kept
Hmm.
only within on-prem or within the network perimeter of the organization, um, rather than relying on um, consume a software as a service model, to third party platforms. Now, but obviously, with that being said, um, more and more Gen AI services, are coming probably every week. You probably
Yeah,
see,
it will be
because
every
this,
day
we
will
do
come very
this
soon. There will be
every
a
day.
trend where
We
every
do
day and
this.
every hour is coming new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, we do this, we do. So I think any assessment, so you've got to do an AI risk assessment. It has to be part of their standard. It has to be part of the fabric.
Hmm.
Like typically, if you think like 10 years back, third party risk assessment was new. nobody, I mean, like some people started doing it. Okay, I heard of it. Oh, do I need to do it? Oh, I don't know. Okay, that organization is doing it. Oh, I should also start doing it. And then from third party risk, you also start looking at, okay, fourth party risk and fifth party risk, because they have subcontracts and so forth. And then you realize, oh, okay, this is getting too complex. I don't know how far I can go, and I don't have time to do it. So people just went scratched the surface. I did a questionnaire, and I tick in the box because I got to do my cyber insurance. I just did my third party risk assessment, but then still breach happens. Right?
That's true.
I think this is also going to be the same thing. Most likely, you're going to have you try your best to do your due diligence. I think what you can do is you assess the risk.
Hmm.
You done enough due diligence to assess the risk at a point in time, because
Yeah.
risk assessment is at a point in time. It's based on you can only go by what information is available at that point in time and how much time you have to be able to deliver that risk assessment so that you can move on to the procurement stage, right?
Agree.
So because somebody will bug you, oh, can you give me the clearance?
And that is not
Can you give me
possible
the
every time.
clearance?
Yeah, that's a live example of accepting a risk or accepting a functionality. Indirectly, it's all about convenience. It's creating a, convenience for the user. Okay, let me automate, let me to use AI and all. That's the reason I ask.
Exactly. So and if you look at if you're at a conjecture where I want to increase my revenue, and you're trading, you're comparing that with the security risk, the revenue will always win, because
Hmm.
business has to run. So business has to run, and to run a revenue or to increase the revenue, to run a business, it'll always be, there'll be some risk. Now, okay, we just need to assess the risk and document it, and then have a plan to be able to mitigate it and review the service at a point of time. But yeah, I think it comes down to risk management. As you said rightly, I think at the start, there's no perfect security. It's all about how you manage the risk.
Hmm.
Um, what are you trading off at a point in time? If the business has got unlimited money, then you just go for life, just putting in controls.
And that is a myth.
That is a myth. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all how you're trading the waters at that point in time, based on the dynamics, basically.
True.
So, yeah, I think and this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk next, which is a tactical and operational approach, because I think what I just described is typically, most of us go through this at some stage or the other, because um, a business will come and say, oh, okay, you know what, I'm spending too much on my Microsoft licenses, and I need to put some kiosk devices at some sites and so forth. It'll be with a generic user account. I don't have money to spend money on licenses, so it's going to be a very basic license. I'm going to put a kiosk device at various locations. That way I'm able to save X amount of money. Now Now, as a security architect, you cannot say, "Oh, no, 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 it's not a pattern. No,
Yeah.
this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing to do. This is not best practice." NIST, you will say NIST 863, whatever identity, digital identity document says, "Oh, you got to have a, named account. You cannot have this. There are best practices in terms of how the identity controls should be managed." Um, but yeah, but in reality, the reality is always different. You got to do some tactical and operational decisions to be able to support the business. um, and that's where the security architect's role comes in, to
Okay.
identify how would you how would you support this particular use case, or maybe other use cases,
Hmm.
which are not necessarily best practices. They are not best practices, but they are probably um, sub I would say sub good practices or average practices, um, without increasing the risk. Now you want to meet the business requirement, but you want to meet it in such a way that you're not blowing away companies' resources, but at the
True.
same time keeping the risk at the same level.
So I was just giving a few examples on the tactical approach. I think one of the ones I mentioned was the kiosk. I think there could be many other examples, but I
Hmm.
think every organization would go through this
Yeah.
at some stage, either because of business challenges or technology limitations. It could, when I say technology limitations, it could be licensing. For example, somebody will say, I don't have licensing now for, let's say, I'm using a particular solution for privilege access management, right? So initially, organization said, okay, we're going to buy only 100 licenses because that's
Okay.
that's the number of admins we have. So let's lock in 100 licenses. Now the next tier for that would be, say, 500 licenses, but organization doesn't have 500 admins. So we'll say, okay, I have only, I'm short of, say, 50 admins, but but I've got only 100 licenses. So what do I do now? So you got to do compensating controls in that particular situation.
True.
So these are tactical operational decision, controls will need to be implemented, and there the security architect comes in handy to recommend. Okay, I need to ensure. Okay, I may not have privileged session monitoring, but then can I ensure that the admin console or the admin workstations or admin servers, I've got detailed auditing enabled, and I'm putting them into the same solution, and I'm having configuration auditing turned on. So as an example, somebody, if a Wintel admin adds himself or herself to the domain admin group, I need to be notified, as an example. And that kind of kicks off a trigger to the SOC team to be able to ask the questions.
True.
So that could be one of the example of implementing a tactical and operational control. While the ideal control would be, okay, you have a privileged session monitoring, just in time access. Somebody saying, I need admin access, so I request for just in time token with a privileged session manager. It gives me the secret. I log into I do an RDP or SSH session with the server. The session gets recorded, and then I log off, and the session is terminated, and the secret is also terminated. And then the session gets recorded, and somebody goes and monitors the session if there is something like that. So that's an ideal control. But then there'll always be a median control, in situations where there are constraints.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's where I've got to ensure I think while adopting the patterns, we've got to continuously assess the risk as well. Okay, while doing this, are we ensuring the risk is kept to the residual level as you would want it to be. I think, and I think I mentioned that before, is as far as the architect continuously assessing the risk. So sometimes the risk might be very informally assessed because it's there at the back of the mind. Okay, what's the risk? But typically, at the end of the day, you got to document your risk as a part of your annual risk assessment exercise to see, okay, have I implement the controls, or have I degraded the controls in a way that I need to reassess the risk and bump up the risk level. So that's one of the
and this is something we do in the design stage when you finalizing the patterns and everything. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So the pattern would be, you got to use a privilege session manager, you got to use a jump host, but then that's a pattern, and then you reach a stage where you need to create exceptions from the pattern, and then whenever you create an exception from the pattern, you assess what's the alternative control you can implement, and by implementing that alternate control, are you able to maintain the risk? I think that will be a good win if you're able to maintain the risk, because if you want to reduce the risk further, it costs money.
Agree.
So I think one of the key things always the security architect needs to think is, am I going to spend more money? I think we are all very good in technical controls and recommending gold-plated controls. And I think most of the security architects they do a great job. I'm not saying no, someone is better than the other, but it has to be in the context of the organization. Because if you're not a defense or a banking organization, obviously there's no gold mine to protect, but then you got to then think about what are you protecting, and or what you need to balance with with the other controls we need to have in place. So and I think that's a mindset always needs to be there. And I think if a security architect works with the other business stakeholders as well, to be able to understand, okay, if I want to reduce, I think that's the reason the CISSP domain number one is risk management. That's why there's a reason why risk management is the first domain in CISSP, because I think if you understand that with your cost and benefit of implementing the controls, I think most of the people will do a good job.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to cover off, and I think the other one, there's a very common use case. I think most of the people do this. I think if I talk about a security architect, what do you do? And they call themselves, I'm an identity architect, right? When I say an identity architect, it might be an identity architect specific to a particular product solution. It might be Okta, or it might be IBM or whatever it is. Or when I say, okay, I'm a cloud architect, I'm a cloud security architect, okay, because I specialize in AWS security, or I'm specializing in AWS security, or I'm an application security architect because I'm an expert Java stack developer. I've been doing Java development for an X number of years, and I moved into application security, and I'm very good in um, implementing secure by design applications. So, and I think most of the people, I would say, in today's life, they kind of sit in one or the other domains. And I've just listed 3 domains there, but there are many other domains. And you could also be a security operations center architect, as an example. And somebody's an expert
I
in
think
setting up.
nowadays it's coming that new, because nowadays a lot of companies are building their internal SOC, and that is why there is a demand for that, SOC architectures and all that, because they want to design all the solutions and everything.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very common use case. And I think and the key building point for any architecture would be, okay, what are your information assets, right? What sort of classification you have? Most of the people don't have classification. I think people are good in writing paper and standards. People write standards, and this is a classification. But then when it comes to implementing the classification onto our actual assets, that's where I think
It backfire.
really, yeah. There's a lot of time travel and a lot of energies to be spent there. But I think as far as you've got a good understanding of what you want to protect, and what are the compliance requirements, and then somebody will say, I'm specific to the product only, because they might be, I'm very good in Okta, as an example, or or I'm very good in Splunk, as an example. So and these days, sometimes vendors drive the solutions to the company, because you got bargains and enterprise agreements with the vendors, and that drives a company. But typically the solution, that's why you call it as a solution, because when the word solution comes into it, because it has to be attached to a vendor, because I don't think anybody's implementing some people might be doing security onion as an open source, or you might be doing a Wazoo, as an example, on a security operations center as an open source. There are some organizations still use, like Greenbone vulnerability assessment scanner, as an example, right? Greenbone is an open source vulnerability assessment scanner. You can use. I think there's other open source WAPs which are available on GitHub. You can build your own security organization with using open source tools. There's nothing stopping from it. But when I say solutioning, it's vendor vendor specific. So the architect needs to have a good understanding and good appreciation of what the solution offers. Now, the solution blueprint, and the vendor product engineering, and I think I think the advantage of the solutioning here is because you have you have the benefit of somebody from a product SME coming from the vendor. So you work with a product vendor. They'll give you what works and what doesn't work. What have they what are the success stories in the past with other customers in the similar industry or similar patterns or delivering similar outcomes. Um, so that way there is some starting point, typically, and vendors like to give that, as a kind of a boilerplate template. This is a blueprint. This is what you start with. This is a best practice guide. This is a foundational design. So I think security solution architect is one of the probably the easiest use case as compared to the other three I just talked about, because where you kind of know the perimeter of where you're working with. Like
Yeah.
you kind of, okay, this is this is the scope of work. You kind of have a good scope definition. These are the licenses you got. These are the product features you got, and these are the use cases you got to solve. Um, and I think what the security architect mainly needs to do is just ensure that you got your enterprise standards. You're implementing those standards and baselines and patterns, and see if and most of that should have been done as a part of the product evaluation stage anyway. So there shouldn't be any surprises. If the security architect wasn't involved in the product evaluation, then there'll be a surprise. But ideally, you would expect that the solution is being designed or being implemented to what your organization expects it to be. So
And I believe now the definition of solution architect also got changed. Now the guy should know compliance also. He need to know privacy by design, security by design, AI by design. So I think that perspective also got changed. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because as the
yeah,
things are
exactly.
getting changed
Yeah,
and they are looking for that. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the concept is do it by design, and
Hmm.
then um, measure and monitor the exceptions.
Okay.
So because you can't secure everything, you provide the minimum principles to be able to design it so that there are minimum regret costs. Because a good example is encryption at rest, right?
Yeah.
So encryption at rest has to be done when you deploy the new virtual machine.
Hmm.
You can't do it later on because it's a regret cost. You can't do encryption of the data which has already been stored for the last 2 years. So
True.
then you got to transfer it to a new VM and do the encryption and from the start. So those certain controls have got high regret costs which need to be implemented as a part of design. Like
Hmm.
whether it's secure code, like taking a secure Python library, taking a secure Java library, or hardening your router or hardening your firewall, securing your management interfaces to the firewall, or implementing secure protocols for your interfaces between the applications, or it could be uh, designing configurations for your new cloud platform.
Yeah.
So all these things need to be done at a minimum. So when you say secure by design, there are certain baseline controls we need to be designed and implemented at the start,
Hmm.
with an understanding that as the process matures and as as the solution is operating in a normal mode, you keep monitoring and improving it, and then monitor the exceptions, and that way you keep improving what your posture as you go.
Okay.
And that's where GRC comes in, because that's why GRC is part of the. So I think having that interface, architects interface with operations, because operations will provide inputs from lessons learned from the incidents. So if
Hmm.
you have an incident, okay, what are the lessons learned from the incident? Okay, I might need to improve certain controls from that incident, which might have an input to the security architecture process, because I need to design the control differently so that I should be able to prevent that incident, same type of an incident attack vector for the next time. And
Okay.
then based on that, I need to provide that input again to the GRC team. Then, okay, you need to monitor these controls in such a way that we don't have these exceptions coming again. So that's that handoff which needs to happen effectively as well. And then as you mature, I think you probably hit some other use cases in terms of, okay, while I'm keep implementing the controls, I want to make sure I want to continuously improve, but also stay within the boundary of costs
Okay.
and business impact, for example, because usability and security you got to balance. You don't want to. I think the best thing for security is simplicity. I think if you increase complexity of the solution, it's hard to keep it secure, because I think
True.
people think make it, put in all these controls, but then it might increase, it might decrease the usability and the flexibility, and it might be, even if you would have the controls in place, but you would not be able to maintain those controls. So over a period of time, it will degrade. So simplicity is a good friend of security, as far as it's fundamental. Um, so I think those concepts need to be kept in mind, and as I said, keep assessing the risk, keep measuring the posture, keep talking collaboratively and working collaboratively internally within the team and the business. And I think, and then and be abreast of the latest patterns. I think then if these things are done right, I think most of the security architects will do a good job. Yeah.
And you, if you talk about the one of the most important skill, okay, I can have an option of become a following architecture and all that, but if I ask you in this way about that, what is the most important skills required to learn, to maintain that when you become a solution architect, security architect, what is the one most important skill is required according to you, apart from technical skills?
Risk assessment.
Risk
So I
assessment,
think,
okay.
yeah. So I think having the risk knowledge, I think most of the people, I think I would say my peers and most of the people, my community I've interacted with, they're very good in technology side of things. All have come from technology, from different backgrounds.
Hmm,
I think the risk, when I say risk mindset, it's more of a business risk impact, not necessarily, um, not that for not a technology, not a technology implication, I'm talking about, but yeah. So the business risk context is very important, and I think, and that's an evolving journey, and um, it's I mean, there is a lot of open source knowledge on technology. Everybody can learn technology. It's, I think, even controls and frameworks and so forth is open source. Um, but for the risk, I think the only way you can learn is, through further interacting with peers, and also understanding the touch points across how business processes function. So within the organization. So I think that's more important. Contextualizing the security controls within the business process
hmm,
is very important, because a business process would be functioning in a particular way, because that's how the organization's construct, or the perimeter is.
hmm.
Because there's no appetite to make change. That's what the organization will say. I don't want to make changes, and I want to live with this risk, and I have my risk appetite defined. I'm okay to accept certain level of risk. So you will say, "Hey, security architect, can you make sure you give me the controls which are practical to be implemented and which can be easily adopted?" Because I think the last thing you want is recommend a control, and which is either not implemented, or is implemented but not operating effectively.
And the reason of asking is basically there's a lot of peoples are there who work on the things and all that, but they still stick with the, what is the basics we have to follow. That's the reason I asked this question. Because more than having a technical skills, now we have other parameters also, like, challenge, requirement and all that. That's the reason I basically asked that question. And
Yeah,
thanks
exactly.
for answering that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the one good question, good question always the security architect should keep asking is, have I got the budget to implement the control? Because I think the
Hmm.
first thing you got to ask, I think, we are good in going with the recommendation, give a PowerPoint report and give an architecture design and document and say, okay, this is what it's good. But then, have I looked well enough? Are there any are the if there are not enough trade-offs, that means I have not looked hard enough, right? There'll
Exactly.
always be some trade-offs,
Yeah,
um,
agree.
in any decision making. So I think that's the mindset. I think you got to. I think any person, any increment, or any professional, if that person adopts, I think, yeah, it will be a good outcome for the organization.
And how do you see the future of architects according to you? as the AI basically evolved and all that, how do you see that perspective of this particular function?
The architecture function would need to adapt to new ways of thinking.
Hmm.
So now, so AI would so AI has introduced new risks. So the way the and obviously and there are other new technologies with IoT as well. There's not just there and many other evolving technologies.
Hmm.
So the growing job of an architect would be to understand what risks would a new emerging technology bring in the context of an organization.
True.
If the organization has got enough appetite and budget to embrace that technology, then does the organization have enough capabilities within via people and process to be able to manage that? If yes, then what sort of monitoring controls need to be ensured? Either uh, uh, besides monitoring controls, what sort of guardrails need to be introduced to ensure, okay, what's the these are the minimum policy or governance requirements you need to adopt, and then monitor the compliance to those policies and governance. So architect would also play an assurance specialist role, because I think if you look at it, some people try to say, I'm an architect, I just go and design solutions.
Hmm.
But it's going to change, and it is changing. The
True.
architect also needs to do a level of build assurance. Okay, you got to ensure that whatever has been designed is, the build is according to the design. That's number one. And the third is, after you've implemented the solution with AI or IoT, for example, and what sort of monitoring, measuring metrics could have in place to ensure that the design patterns are intact and they're maintained and they're operating as expected. Now, as an
Okay.
example, if you're introducing new, I mean, I'll take an example like, you got different LLM models, as an example, AWS Bedrock is a very common one. On Bedrock, you have different foundation models, Claude Sonnet or, Perplexity and so forth, right? So, and each model would have gone through some level of testing, which AWS would say, okay, this is the conformity testing assessment that being performed with the model based on, okay, the parameters and so forth, like in terms of fairness and you know, etc. So, but when that's being adopted in the organization needs to define, okay, what are the guardrail policies I need to implement in terms of prompt engineering or some of the prompts or APIs which I can permit.
Hmm.
Um, you know, from that perspective, do I want to allow query to LLMs from all user desktops, or is that has to be a controlled API authentication from designated workstations? And then if I do so, okay, how do I measure any variance to the prompts
Hmm.
I've configured? How do I ensure, maybe in the initial, I might need to do some throttling and learning of prompts, right? I think based on the business process. I mean, similar to DLP, like typically when you implement a DLP, you need to do some learning in terms of what sensitive classifiers I need to learn so to be able to protect them, to be able to block it. Same thing with AI as well. I think you've got to do
Hmm.
you have some guardrails which are protected, but then you have some learning you've got to do in terms of prompts based on typically whether it's a developer community or it's a business user community, or it's an IT support community using code assist for generative AI, or they are using some sort of agentic AI to write some templates or so forth. Yeah, I think the and the architect needs to be um, doesn't need to do engineering, but needs to be quite close to hands-on.
True.
I think the you can't be away from technology. I think you can't just say, I'm just going to draw diagrams and just draw blocks, and going to give you this piece of paper and then go and implement the controls. You got to know the technology, and you got to go and check in the system and say,
Hmm.
have you implemented the controls of what I've said? I think, and if you do that, and this is for any architect, if you do that, then you're kind of helping also drive the mindset change of the developer or an engineer. Or okay, somebody's asking that question. There is some assurance oversight here, and then there's kind of shift in the way not only secure by design, but also secure by build. Now, people say secure by design, but then it has to be secure by build. And then so when you test it, you don't have critical and high issues. Because otherwise, what happens is everybody says yes, we are secure by design, and you go and implement the controls. And then you do penetration testing or do security testing, and you come up with security critical and high issues.
And I was
Yeah.
surprised.
So
I was also surprised that okay, nowadays for security architect also they will asking for the to be pen tester and all that. You know, I was very surprised with that. I don't know why, but they asking for the pen testing skills and all that and to have visibility. And I've seen the people transition from the OSCP and pen tester to become a security architect. So yeah, there is
exactly,
a
yeah.
definitely requirement of technicalities to be upgraded.
Yes, absolutely. And I think and that skill will be very handy, because if you have done if you know what are the attack paths, then you know where to secure,
Exactly.
right? Now and that's a bottom up approach. And you got to do, I think you got to have a mix of both top down and bottom up approach. Bottom up,
Hmm.
as you said, like an OSCP, or somebody like a system engineer, or somebody like an application security engineer, go and trying to secure web applications.
Hmm.
Um, and you say, I think the pen testing one is a very good example you brought about, because um, when you want to do a pen test, because you need to have a good understanding of what's the end-to-end landscape and the the attack paths, which is public facing, which are the public facing interface, and how the applications are connected to each other,
Hmm.
and where the data path and data flow is. Um, it'll help with how to scope the penetration testing, because typically, if you to go and give a scope to the penetration testing, they'll say, I'm just going to do a blind test, go for life. People are very, enthusiastic these days to go and test. I'm
Yeah.
going to go and get the domain admin credentials. I'm going to, do an attack path, whatever you can attack path traversal on the Active Directory, get the credentials, and then do a lateral movement, to gain control of, say, one of the other Windows servers which are domain joined, as an example, right? So, and that's a very typical method of pen testing. But then when you want to scope it,
Hmm.
um, I think what comes into play is what type of testing, what type of tests you're going to scope. But before the, you got to understand, okay, have I got certain group policy objects, which I need to reconfigure so that I get the right testing results. Because sometimes
Hmm.
you might have certain controls in place, so it might give a false result on the pen test. It might say, "Oh, it's not possible, to
Hmm.
penetrate." But then, similarly for a web application, you might need to dilute certain web application firewall policies to allow the penetration testing to do a proper pen test on the web application. Otherwise, you might be testing only a WAF policy. They might just test the WAF policy. I couldn't get into the web application, so you get a green tick on the report. So
And I believe now understood. It makes sense, why we need to involve the architect also post pen testing, just to validate the flow and all that.
exactly, yeah, exactly, yeah. So
That's
I
great.
think that's very important. So we might need to make sure certain policies are turned off. We might need to you know dilute certain controls so that you test, um, so that the scope is executed properly, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that's great actually. And one thing I like really this slide, there's no much content around this section. They say, okay, you need to be this, but how you segregated this content, it is just commendable, to be frank. I love this. I'm going to use this. I will take your consent, but I'm going to use this for the future content and all that, because that is really a great insight, to be frank.
Yeah. And I think I mean, look, as I said, right, I think there's no, what I've shared is just my experience or my perspective. I'm not saying what I've said is 100% correct.
Hmm.
I say I'm also a learner. I've also learned through experience and sharing with peers, and learning from peers. And there's no one perfect way of doing things. I mean, I just, I think the more you collaborate and talk to people, I think probably the better the outcome it is. I think, yeah, and that's why I call it as an evolving perspective. It's not the perspective; it's an evolving perspective. Um, um, and it'll always be a work in progress. I would say, it's more of that.
No, that's completely fine. That's the reason, I love that idea about, discussing about the security architecture from the perspective of how do we see. So I really like that concept, to be frank. And that is really amazing, to be frank.
Yeah, yeah. I think
But
that's why I wanted to kind of I'll pause sharing now. Yeah, I think.
but thanks, Maddie. It was really a great content, and I'm sure people will get a great insight from that. And if someone has any kind of queries and all that, can I tell them to ping you? Can I share your LinkedIn profile in um, the chat box? Oh, sorry, in the
Yeah, 100%.
LinkedIn descriptions and all
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
because there will
absolutely.
be
No
a
problem.
lot of queries around that. So I thought I will share your LinkedIn profile there. So might be they will get the benefits and everything.
No problem. No problem. Happy to help.
Thanks a
Uh,
lot. Thanks a lot, Maddie. And I know a bit late there. I'm sorry for doing this extinctions and all that, but I truly mean it, and it definitely a great learning for us, to be frank.
no, I've learned equally as well interacting with you. I think likewise, and I appreciate having me here. Um, except for the few technical issues, but hopefully, but yeah, I enjoyed the session very much. Thank you.
Same here, Maddie. And thanks, Maddie. And this is all from our side, team. And it was really a great session, and we're looking forward for more sessions like that. And if you're new to the channel, team, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you so much for this amazing session.
Thank you. Thank you.